Hello. So in this presentation, I'll share my thoughts on the readings and lectures for Module 3 and 4, which focuses on biodiversity conservation in land and marine ecosystem. So the articles and lectures shows that biodiversity conservation cannot be understood through a single discipline. Ecological, climate, science, and governance are all connected. So biodiversity laws involves ecological issues as well as policies, institutional, and social economic challenges. Across both modules, our three themes really stood out to me. So, first, biodiversity patterns are determined by ecological and climate processes. And second, human activities and climate change are changing ecosystem in a very important way. And thirdly, you look at conservation approaches must operate at multiple scale and address everything from local ecosystem management to global management system. And to explain this thing really, I'll begin with a theory from the lecturer that help us to understand how biodiversity develop across ecosystem. And then the reading gives us a very good example from places like deserts, tropical forest, coral reef, and mangroves. And what's very clear is that biodiversity patterns are determined by long-term ecological processes, but their future depends more and more on human institutions and environmental governance. So several ecological theories explains why biodiversity is unevenly spread around the world. Key questions are, example, why do some areas have much more biodiversity than others? One explanation is the time stability hypothesis. Ecosystem that stays stable for long period tend to have more biodiversity. Tropical regions often shows this because their climates have been stable for millions of years. Another explanation looks at ecosystem productivity. Places with lots of sunlight, rain, warmth produce more biomass through photosynthesis. And this high productivity supports bigger food webs from more species. The lectures also I highlight species interaction like competition and resource sharing. So when species compete for the same resources, they may adopt to use different niche. And over time, this allows many species to live together in the same ecosystem. The theories indicate biodiversity patterns derive from several interacting factors, including climate stability, resource supply, and evolutionary history. And also, the theories become clear when we look at the particular ecosystem covered in the readings. Al studies plant diversity in the dry region of Tabuk and Kulais in Saudi Arabia. Deserts might seem simple at first, but this study really shows they support varied plant communities determined by climate, soil, and water. And using bibliometric and ecological analysis, the paper identifies several research groups studying desert biodiversity. They examine plants, communities, dynamic, model how climate affects vegetation, and use genetic method for conservation. So, for example, predictive ecosystem modeling is increasingly used to focus how plant communities might change under changing climate conditions. And research on biodiversity in dry ecosystem is still limited. So this gap restricts our knowledge and could slow effective conservation, drawing attention to the need of more studies. And from a governance perspective, so this gap matters really. Less studies on ecosystem might get less attention in policy and funding. So increasing research in dryland ecosystem affects both ecological and conservation planning. The reading from our Cargill 2021 studied tropical cloud forest. Such ecosystem form at a certain elevation where clouds supply moisture for plants. Cloud forests have higher biodiversity and many unique species. However, the study shows many remain unprotected. So at the same time, you see climate change is shifting the condition that keeps cloud forests alive. As temperature rises, cloud formation moves upwards, and this reduces moistures for the forest, even if the forest proper remains intact. And the lecture also links this to the intermediate disturbance hypothesis, which says moderate disturbance can boost biodiversity. So, with little disturbance, dominant species take over. With very high disturbance, only a few tough species survive, and but at moderate levels, both competitive and opportunist species can live together. And this idea is important for managing forests and wildlife, such as the California, where fire naturally shapes ecosystem. And a very key point from the forest study is the divide between scientific knowledge and policy actions. So scientific identifies a vulnerable system, but institutions are slower to respond. Carroll 2025 reading explores conservation debates about old growth forests in the United States. So, old growth forests are complex ecosystem with trees of different ages. They have canopy gaps from natural disturbances and a diverse understory, creating many habitats for different species. But conserving these forests need coordinating through different places and time frame. And the paper really covers policy debates about the proposed National Old Growth Amendment, which aim to increase protection for old growth forests on federal lands. And the proposal faced are political challenges as priorities shifted between administrations. So, example highlighting that successful biodiversity conservation relies on steady governance as much as on scientific knowledge. And the reading from Futian and Tao 2022 study Siberian Boreal forest using satellite data from 1985 to 2015. And the study finds forest expanding in higher latitude, mainly between 63 degrees and 69 north. Warm temperature allows forests to move northward. So at the same time, the mix of forest species is changing. You see broadleaf and conifer species responding differently to climate. And very important finding is that temperature influence forests change more than rainfall in this area. And the study also shows the value of long-term ecological monitoring. Satellite helps researchers monitor changes over decade and across large regions. So, very another good example is climate stress coming from the reading of Sanchez Martins 2025, which studied the forest, Amazon rainforest. And researchers conducted long-term experimental drought studied and observed how forests respond to less rainfall. And they found that long droughts can change forest structure. Droughts also reduce carbon storage and alter species composition. So although the forest can show some adaptivity reactions, prolonged drought reduces ecosystem robustness. And this matters really because tropical forests play a very key role in global carbon cycle. If they stop absorbing carbon dioxide, they could become carbon sources and speed up climate change. So, Module 4 really shifts the focus to marine ecosystem and global ocean governance. The reading from Cebulla 2025 studied the biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction agreement, which aims to protect biodiversity in ocean areas beyond national borders. And these areas covers almost half of the Earth's surface and are among the largest shared ecological system. Marine governance is complex, looking at this reading, and several international agreements already regulate ocean activities such as fisheries and maritime law. And the authors highlight tension between protecting biodiversity and managing fisheries, which supports the livelihood of many coastal communities. And the reading also shows that managing global common is very complex because ecological, economic, and political interests overlap. And this spotlights the difficulties of balancing the interests and the requirements for coordinating solutions. Rule 2023 reading offers a long-term ecological view of Caribbean mangrove ecosystem. So mangrove provides important ecosystem services like coastal protection, habitat for marine life, and carbon storage. So using paleoecological evidence, so the study considers how mangrove ecosystem have responded to change over the long term. And the key point here is that ecosystem formed over millions of years can be destroyed in just a decade by human activities such as coastal development. So understanding this long ecological really helps history researchers to observe patterns of resilience along with vulnerability that can guide today's ecosystem in managing efforts. And two more readings are focused on coral reef ecosystem. Example, the UC in 2024 study long-term changes in coral reef around Zanzibar, Tanzania, and a major bleaching event linked to El Nino in 1998, 2007, and 2016 caused by significant coral death. And another reading example is CNOSTA 2023, which examines community-led coral reef restoration projects in southern Kenya. So you see, local communities work with conservation groups to restore reef using man-made structures. And this example really shows a bigger shift in conservation, moving from top-down management to more participatory community-based governance. So the idea of blue carbon discussed by Bennett shows how a coastal ecosystem connects biodiversity conservation with climate policies. So the blue carbon ecosystem, like mangroves, seagrass, and salt marshes, store carbon in plants and sediment. Although they cover a small part of the Earth's surface, they may provide about 3% of global greenhouse gas mitigation through carbon storage. And what makes blue carbon interesting really in this reading is that the ecosystem provides many services at once. They store carbon, protect coasts from erosion, support fisheries, and maintain marine biodiversity. However, the reading also highlights governance challenges carrying out blue carbon projects requiring reliable monitoring, carbon accounting, and policies that correspond with the international climate agreement like the Paris Agreement. So, from a system perspective, blue carbon shows how ecological processes, economic incentives, and governance institution interact. And conservation outcomes depends not only on ecological science as well as on policy designs and institutional coordination. So when discussing these readings with my peers, one thing really stood out, and we looked at the importance of connecting ecological knowledge with social and economic realities. So several of us really noticed that conservation approaches commonly struggle when ecological goals don't really coincide with local livelihoods or governance system. And a very good example, we look at the fishery governance discussed at the reading of Sebula in 2025, really shows how conservation policies must consider economic dependence on marine resources. Similarly, the coastal reef restoration work described by CNOSTA 2023 shows that preservation efforts are often more effective when local communities are directly involved in managing ecosystem. And reading all that, basically my reflection also, one theme that stood out to me across the reading and the lecturers is the close connection between environmental system and governance policy. So many of the studies shows that ecosystem relies resilience depends not only on ecological processes but also on how resources are managed through institution, monitoring, and regulation. Professor Milgray, lecturers on marine ecosystem example, highlighted the ecological importance of ocean and the threats facing marine biodiversity, particularly overfishing. So you see, when fishing have are harvested faster than population can recover, it disrupts marine food web and can damage habitats such as coral reef. And this problem reflects what scholars describe as common pool resources, in which shared resources like fisheries can be overused without effective governance. And we see this from a scholar, Ostrom, 1990, looking at policy tools such as fishing regulations, education for local communities, and promotion of sustainable seafood choices are therefore very important for protecting marine ecosystem. Also, Professor Nicolas Sanchez, lecturers on environmental law, also helped me to place these issues within a broader global governance framework. So, major environmental agreements from Stockholm to Rio and Paris also have shaped international approaches to sustainability development and environmental protection. And also recent discussion on biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction, BBNG NJ, shows that countries are still working to improve the governance of marine resources. And these discussions often link to broader climate negotiations at the Conference of Parties meeting, where environmental stability and energy transition are increasingly connected. Also, looking at Professor Luis Enrique's lectures on marine biology emphasize the role of scientific research and innovation in understanding ocean system. So the oceans play a major role in regulating climate through carbon cycling and global circulation patterns, underscoring the importance of scientific monitoring for both conservation and policy decisions. So overall, the reading and the lecturers really highlighted the importance of integrating approaches to sustainability. Ecological system, governance structures, and policy decisions are deeply interconnected. So understanding this relationship really is very important when thinking about the broader environmental challenges, including climate policies and energy transitions.